Oh, there we go. All right. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another talk night. It's been a little while since we've had the last one. I think it's been about a couple months now. But today we are here with Jordan from EA, who's going to be talking about his experience in the industry and a couple other things. So, you can give an introduction to yourself. I don't want to take the spotlight away from you.
I know, cool. I appreciate it. First things first, I appreciate you having me and letting me, share the stage with you and speak about all things game development because it is a very behind the curtains type of industry. So I'm excited to kind of at least chat about it and see, different ways that you guys could actually get in. But as for me, hi, Jordan. I am from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I'm in the States. I'm a little bit under New York, which is probably the more popular state. Um, I got into the industry because as everybody likes to say, American football dream died. So I had to pivot from wanting to be, a professional or a football player to whatever was next. So my next constant thing in my life was video games, and I figured, well, why not try that? I'm in a weird like experimental phase because football and sports in general took up majority of my life. So I was like, cool, let me just find something different. And video games was there. So I saw a ad on YouTube for I believe it was ZBrush at the time, which is funny because I'm not an artist. I can't sculpt nothing. But I was like, cool, I'll try this out and see how far it takes me. And one thing led to another. I realized that I needed a ticket into the industry, which we'll get into the whole backstory behind that. But I figured I need a ticket into the industry, so I'll start my own studio and just kind of see where that takes me. And sure enough, I was able to ship my own game on PlayStation. That was the first game I ever made. Launched it in March of 2019. So in 2 weeks exactly, on the 28th of this month, it'll be 5 years since I launched that game, and time is blowing by.
Wow, that's actually I think that's really cool. Again, I think I actually I commented on one of your LinkedIn posts. I said like, if you can't make a, if you can't get a job in the industry, make your own job. And I think this is a amazing like example of
Bingo.
that.
No, 100%. I think a lot of times, a lot of people look the other way when it comes to, I can't get a job into the industry now, so I'll just keep trying and trying and trying. But indie route is a very valuable route because I come from that. But just to keep myself on track, because I know I'll go off on a tangent. I did that. I launched it. I won an Epic Games grant, which was really cool. Shout out to Christian and the folks at Epic Games. And then I ended up, about a year and a half after getting my first industry job at Lost Boys Interactive, which got bought by Gearbox a couple years later. And then from there, I've pivoted now to EA. So that's currently where I'm at.
That's wonderful. Okay. So I think that's great. We're definitely gonna talk about I think your game a little more a little later on. I wanna kind of delve into the process of that, but I think the first question, actually, you know what? Let's start with that. I think that's a great starting point. So your project, Sun, right? If I'm correct,
Yes, son. Yep.
on the PlayStation 4. Alrighty. So, how I know you've said before that this game has been a little challenging to build. It took up most of your time. It's been about 5 years. Is it still on the PS4 today? And how are you like making money off of it, or what did you learn out of it? It's three questions in one, but
Cool. So what I can say that because what I learned from it is a whole topic in itself. But what I can say is it like I said, it's been almost 5 years since the game has come out. The funny part about it is the game obviously I sold the most copies I ever did the first like year, like or well months to a year that it came out. It slowed down in the middle years, and then as of now, which is insane to say, it has kind of bounced back up. So it sells actually pretty well because it goes on sale in the PlayStation Store, so it's still up there for everybody to play. They can play it on PlayStation 5 or 4, whatever one that you prefer. It's still playable, but it's been on sale quite a few times. And funny enough, I think people just want like a small, cheap indie horror game to play at night or just for stream or something of that effect. and it's actually still selling really well, which is just funny to me because like I don't do any promotion on it. I don't talk about it outside of like, talking to people who are learning about the industry or just want to learn about how to publish a game or something. And yeah, it still sells, which is just mind-boggling to me because it's just living on a cloud and PlayStation server somewhere, and people just decide that they want to buy it if they see it on sale for $3 or something. Um, what were you gonna say?
Sorry, is it, if I'm correct, I just posted it in the chat. Is this the right one?
Let me see. That is it. Yeah. So that's my
Alrighty.
official gameplay trailer one, which has a super funny story behind it because when I made that trailer, I remember telling my wife in the car, I was like, "Oh, I think it'll do, I don't know, 25,000. I think I might have even shot it lower, 50,000 by like the end of the week or by the end of the month or something like that." And the day that it came out, I was actually asleep and she woke me up because it was supposed to be sent out at like 10 a.m. or something. And she woke me up and I think I had like, it was like 10, 15,000 views in the first like 10 minutes. And then by the end of the day, because I actually have my old notebook from that time, I think we hit 100,000 in like 20 hours or something like that. So it was really cool to see that happen in real time because I had, again, never made a game before, never made a trailer. This was my first go about. And to see that happen right away was just like, it just blew my mind as I sat in my small studio apartment in Arizona.
Yeah, I get that completely. And I do think, like, it's an amazing. I personally have a kind of love for indie horror games. I don't know if you've ever heard the game Devour, but that's a one that I play a lot. A couple others
Mm,
too. I know Phasmophobia started out that way with one developer, and it grew
yeah,
massively. Um, just goes to
yeah,
show, like, those kinds of games, like, to me at least, they really shaped my need to go into the game industry. I kid you not. I think like 4 out of the 5 like games I made that have a demo were completely indie horror games because I just love them so much. I used to watch Markiplier's Let's Plays on them all the time. I love them. They're so great.
yeah. No, totally. And it kind of ties back into like if people wanted to make an indie game, like they often say the first game that you should make as an indie is a horror game and something very small because a lot of things are in the dark. There's not much lighting involved, or a lot of things that you can hide because it's super dark in there. And I very much took that approach when it came out. So um, yeah, I
Yeah.
think in terms of what I learned from that, right? Like it is a I I work in AAA. I have, and I've worked across multiple different projects at this point, and I still personally believe, without a shadow of a doubt, making my own game was the hardest thing that I have ever done. Uh, it it is taxing on a different level because there is a sense of, and I don't know, maybe I put the pressure on myself because I had seen, you know, 100,000 people view the trailer, and I'm like, okay, great, like this could be the big break, and like I need to make this thing the best thing I possibly can. Or if it was just a matter of just like, I grew up trying to be a perfectionist all my life, so I don't know if I was also trying to make like the best game because I feel like I can. Um, and I realized really quickly that like the pursuit of indie perfection is what gets a lot of devs burnt out and feeling like they don't want to make games anymore, especially on the indie side of things. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I learned. I don't think I was actually honestly mentally ready to make my own game. I just thought it was cool and I was like, well, I can just do it. But I think if you have that attitude of just like, well, I'm going to see this through like no matter what, which is again a lot of indies because they just had the love for it, especially making games. Um, it can get really taxing on you mentally, and I was not prepared for that whenever I was going through this.
Yeah, something I always got told by my dad was when I'm starting out, like I'm a new developer. I'm not gonna, make the next what's a good game right now? Like the next Valorant or something like that at this very moment. It takes tons of mistakes and tons of lessons to get over that hurdle. And I think working a game until you've learned everything you can out of it is, from what I know, my best approach to it.
Yeah, no, and it's also important, right? If you want to make an indie game, the very first thing you should tell yourself is, I'm not making Valorant, I'm not making Call of Duty, I'm not making Elden Ring, I'm not making Last of Us. Like, it's just not happening. Like, an indie dev is not going to make something of that nature. Now, for a lot of games out there now, you can make pretty big worlds pretty quick with like procedural generation stuff. There's softwares like Dash and stuff like that that can help kind of speed up the process. But as far as making these big games that you see today that are very popular, those are done by teams of hundreds. I remember working on Tiny Tina's at Gearbox, and I just realized like, for a game of that magnitude, and that's not even Borderlands, it was teams of hundreds at that point. You know
Oh,
what I mean? Like it.
you worked on Tiny Tina? That's
I
actually
did.
amazing. I'm sorry. I'm such a fan of the Borderlands series, so I love it so much, bro.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I worked on Tiny Tina's. Tiny Tina's is really cool. It's very different than Borderlands from a story standpoint. They obviously got to kind
Oh
of keep
yeah.
the art style and whatnot in the same vein, but a nice spin-off. It was no, it was really cool to work on. So, when you work on games of that magnitude versus like trying to do your own indie thing, I think it is incredibly important when you're starting out to separate the two, because a lot of times dreams come to die very quick when you realize the amount of work, effort, trial and error it takes to make some of these like world's biggest games compared to, well, my cool little shooter game, which is also still really cool because it just is. It has its own vibe to it.
Yeah, and I do think that's like something to consider. Like going back to what you said before, being honest with yourself about you're not going to be the next Elden Ring, for example. Like you can't just go, "Oh, I'm going to be great. I'm going to make an MMO. I'm going to be the next World of Warcraft." Like no, that's not
Yeah,
happening. You need a team of at least like hundreds of people just to make a world of that kind of magnitude. And like to run it.
genuinely. Yeah, and you got to think too. Like again, I think it's that curtain. Right? I think it's that curtain that a lot of people don't get to see. And I think because the game industry is so like, you can't see what's behind this because we've all signed NDAs and we can't speak about anything ever. And I think it almost kind of does a weird disservice to a lot of people who want to start in the industry because they get a false narrative of what it takes to make these big games. So a lot of times you can see these amazing games and then be like, oh, well, okay, well, here's 7 designers that I follow that were a part of this. And what you don't realize is that, you know, whenever you're making it, you're one designer, you're one level designer. And there's teams out there that have 20 level designers working on one thing. And that's 20 of them. You know what I mean? And that's 20 like people who have been doing this for years and years, some even decades. So I think there's a realistic expectation that you should absolutely put on yourself the moment you decide to make your own game. Like whatever idea that you got, cut it in half, look at it on a piece of paper or type it into a Google Doc and then cut it half again and then think about it some more and then cut a quarter of it and you probably got your game.
Yeah, and I really like. I think we had a couple of talks actually already about um, kind of what the bike club is trying to do, and one of our biggest points is exactly what you said. We want people to feel less stress going in. We want people to understand the industry. Like obviously you can't get like the full experience without being in there, but
Mm-hmm.
having enough behind you so you can feel a little more confident going into it, it's a huge thing. I really do believe that like most people who go into the industry are like way too anxious, they're way too scared of it, and finding jobs right now is really hard right now. So getting that real world sharing from like graduates and people like industry experts, like it's really important, I think, to have people to understand
Yeah,
it.
no, totally right. And I think because I went to school to be a game designer and I didn't finish. I ended up leaving. But I think one of the things sometimes that ends up happening is you get put into this like you need to kind of do everything, right? Like you need to do everything. I know a lot of people who get their first industry job and they're super nervous the first like 6 months because they're like, well, what if I mess up? Or like, what if I don't help out here or help out there? I think it also is really important to note that like you're coming in as a junior or an associate, one of the two, and you have a lot of guidance from people who actually care about you. I think there's a lot of conversation about studios not caring about people, and I think a lot of that is true to a certain degree. I think once you get way, way, way the ladder, I think those conversations become more and more true. But I think for the middle tier people and even on the bottom, I think it's a matter of just like some of those people are really there to look out for you. So, trying to being fearful of the industry is one thing, but I think the people that you'll meet inside of it, there's people that I know that have gotten married. There are people that I know who have made best friends. Like it is a very tight knit community that bunch of people who are always looking out for each other. Of course, you have the bad apples like we all see on Twitter, but like for the most part, people are
Yes.
great.
Oh
Yeah,
my god, yes. Oh my god,
yeah.
Twitter. Uh, that's
Twitter people, they love to throw out a hot take that no one asked for. So
it's just so out of the blue too. It's like you're talking
yeah.
about games and you're like, I hate dogs, and it's like, where is that coming from? This is not the article to talk about it.
Yeah, I know,
And
I
that's like a
know.
really tame example of like what it could be. So
Mhm. No, totally. Yeah. And, again, I think it's just like, if you find yourself, about to graduate school or graduating school and you're looking around in the industry and you're like, oh, just the whole allure of the AAA mega conglomerates kind of scares me. I think it's fair, but at the same time, like you will absolutely get guided, coached, and pushed along. Again, there's going to be instances where it maybe paints your view of the industry in a different light, but I don't ever like to push that on anybody because it's different. It's situational for everybody. Like some people are gonna see it and be like, wow, like you have no input until you're like a 7-year vet. Or some people just come in and being like, I just love playing as like a part of the team on one of my favorite games that I like grew up playing. So it's a weird balance and it's all situational. But bigger point is, yeah, it's just don't fear too much. It isn't. There's a lot of really, really good people in it.
that's wonderful to hear. All right, I have one question for you. Um,
Okay.
and this is gonna be, I think I did mention it in the document I gave you. I'm not too sure though, but one of the things I did kind of want to ask is, how do you feel about like how do you combat, because we just talked about Twitter, how do you combat specific dilemmas? Like, it doesn't have to be religion based, doesn't have to be anything, but like current situations in the world right now, how do you gear your game so it's not associated with that? Or like, let's say for example, I'm making a game about, I don't know, school shooters, for example. Like, that's a very serious and important topic. How do you kind of, if your game touches on those kinds of topics, how do you go around that? Or like,
I think first and foremost, you don't glorify it. I think whatever is actually going on in the world, regardless of your beliefs or views, you don't put it, if it's negative, we'll go in this example that you brought up. You don't glorify it. If you're coming from a educational standpoint, you could maybe get away with a demonstration on like what to do in a situational standpoint. Chances are you'll probably get a lot of frowns and a lot of blacklists from a lot of people for making a game like that. But in terms of just like anything in religion, I think a lot of that gets strayed away from. And if it does get put into games, I think there is a lot of conversation or a lot of discussions behind what exactly we're putting into the game. It could be anywhere from Call of Duty to a small indie. There needs to be conversations about what you're putting into the game because a lot of it could be viewed as offensive. You may do all the research in the world and put the game out and you put it into what you think is a good light, but it could be taken bad by somebody else, which is, another hot topic on Twitter right now. But I think it is important that you bring in consultancy groups that come in and actually take a look at what you're making from a narrative standpoint all the way down to a game design of being like, hey, this is a little touchy, or this is like, you should switch this up and put this because of this reason. When you get into touchy situations like that, of just anything really, I think it's imperative that you have a ton of discussions and try to steer away from some of like the really hot water things because in all honesty, I don't see how you could spin a situation to where it could be a game almost. There's a lot of
yeah, I
there's a
get
lot of
that.
conversations and a lot of topics that at the end of the day you're trying to make something, I'm using air quotes here, fun or like engaging. And I don't know that there are a lot of topics that people like to touch on that you could make a game out of. And
Yeah,
it's just one
because
of those things where it's like just avoid it. Just I don't understand. Just leave it alone.
yeah, because I've definitely talked to people about that kind of thing where they're playing a game and they're adding a topic that's a little controversial, or even like a very, very smidget controversial, but that one little bit of controversy can, like, Twitter will go at it. You'll see everyone that's just like hits it, and now you're blacklisted on like 7 different companies because it got out of control, without you realizing it, without you having those discussions, interviewing people, even like doing something, like even just saying, oh yeah, sorry, I did a game about, I don't know, like a war, for example, but I'm gonna donate to them, guys, trust me, I'm good. Like, it doesn't work that way.
And no, it really doesn't. And if you're involved in a game development like that, I think studios are getting a whole lot better at it. I think before that wasn't a thing. I think it was very much like, well, we'll hire consultancies and then we'll do our own little internal investigation. I think that has gone to the wayside now, which is good because I think more conversation about things can help bring up bigger issues. For instance, if you got something coming up or you're talking about something or a game coming up and you have something controversial in there, if it's only being seen by 6 executives or 10 leads or something like that, then you don't really know what you're getting into because you're only consulting about 16 people. If you break it down to these hundreds of teams, chances are 50 to 60 different things will be seen and can be brought to your attention. And then you can adjust from there. There are some studios who do not go from that. They'll be like, okay, whatever. Like, you know, all what is it? All press is good press, or whatever the case is. Like, some operate in that manner, but I genuinely think if you get into one of those situations, it's always better to bring it up and just get to chatting and holding a discussion about it, because Twitter's always going to talk, social medias are always going to talk, but I think if you're trying your best and putting it into a positive light, then I think you can tiptoe the line. But there are some stuff that I just don't see how you would go onto one side of the fence and be like, I can turn this into the game, so let me hop over.
For sure, yeah, I get that. And by the way, just to everyone who's kind of listening in, please put your comments in put all your questions, everything in the chat. I'm compiling all of them right now, and towards the end, I'll definitely ask them all to Jordan. So yeah.
Question. That's come up a few times. I've seen that happen. I've talked to devs who, without naming things, have worked at studios where they felt like, this is iffy, and I don't know how to go about designing this. And again, it's just a matter of do not only your own research, don't cloud your judgment by just everybody else's opinion. Do your own research thoroughly. I'd say look at all sides of the angles and kind of come back and try to chat with your group about it, for sure.
Yeah, I do think. Sorry, I'm just reading here. I swear, today I've been so dizzy right now, but I'm back. I'm back.
No, you're good.
Yeah, so I really like your project you worked on I'm just gonna call it S.O.N. I'm sorry, I don't like
No, that works.
S.O.N.
No, that's good. No, go for it.
But yes, I really liked how also it's now on the official PlayStation YouTube. That's very, very cool. That's very good for marketing purposes.
Yeah.
How did you market your game outside of that? Did you reach out to a PlayStation directly, or how did that kind of work?
Yeah, so whenever I took my game to PlayStation, you have to go through a sort of pitch process. You have to start your own company, and then you have to tell them what you're working on, all confidential and NDA stuff. And then once they sign off on it, and you make a GDD, a game design document, and everything, and they see everything, then they open you up to a lot of resources that you can use. I didn't know about the YouTube channel until my account manager, Steve Grohl, shout out Steve. He showed me hey, you can post whatever trailer that you want through our portal that we have here. So all in all, they have a bunch of resources that you can end up using. And I don't think that gets utilized enough by indies, especially if you're on PlayStation platform, because you don't have to necessarily release the game right then and there or a month later after you announce it. I think it could drive a lot of marketing, because it did wonders for me. I ended up putting out 5 trailers, I think, and it did great. So
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think it definitely is one of the largest things that I've learned, that I think actually me and Jade both learned while running this club, was that marketing's very important to get your stuff out there, to promote everything to people. It's probably one of the most important things. And I'm an engineer. I'm not a business student, so it was a lot harder for me to kind of understand the process of this, how it works and whatnot. But I do think that like once you learn how to do it, it becomes 7 times easier for you. And once you market it once, you kind of know what to do for next time, that kind of stuff. But it's interesting how such one single indie game became such a big thing in the PlayStation Store. Like, sure, it's not the next Elden Ring, but the fact like you got it this far, and it's like your own indie company off of it, and through that you got a job at Lost Boys, and then slowly to EA. That's quite intense, especially because from what I'm looking at, it all happened in the span of like, what is that, a 6 year period of like, you worked on your thing, you got a job 2 years later, then you got another job 2 years later.
Yeah.
How did you kind of pace yourself after that? Did you not burn yourself out while doing it, and how did you keep yourself motivated?
I think so. This is going to be this is like my version of it, and I know it's different for everyone. But I always like to say, and I always like to kind of tell people like, what's your reason why? Like what is your purpose in doing this? Because I think once you have that, it'll drive you. It'll actually make you see this through, right? I come from an area where it's just, it is what it is. It has its faults and it has its pluses. And I know a lot of times, a lot of people that I've grown up with, you really only get a couple ways to kind of make it out. And I know that, whenever I go home, I get kind of called a unicorn because I work in the game industry. And while that's like hee hee ha ha, I've always viewed that as like it shouldn't be though, and like it should be one of those things where like you can make games, like it's not something you can't do. Like the same games that you sit around and play, like is the same games that you can help make, So my what keeps me motivated, man, honestly, is just like helping people out and see this be like an actual career that you can like do and actually make money in and have longevity in. There's been layoffs and I totally get all that, but like this is a career for a lot of people that you can make money and like raise a family and actually like do things in. It's a little bit tougher to navigate because you're working in the entertainment industry, sure, but at the same time, like I very much feel like, if I could help, even a couple people from where I'm from, just, make games or like try to get into the industry, I feel like that's kind of one. And that's a thing that I'm actively like still working on, still helping. I still help out some kids from high school and kids that I grew up with, and just kind of pacing them out and helping them like kind of see the vision of games, tell them where to kind of start, and then kind of like piece that together. And then that's like slowly trickled out into like it's just the country in general, and then kind of like the world. Because initially I was only doing it for like kids in Pennsylvania and inner city schools of Pennsylvania, and then it's like moved to like inner city schools of Detroit. There's with my mentor. There's a couple people that are in Florida. There's a bunch of different places that I've kind of been like kind of working my way in to kind of show that like video games is a viable way to like make a good living and you know do something legally fun, so
Legally
yeah.
fun.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just important to me. Like, there's not a lot of ways out for a lot of inner city kids, and I just want to try to open that up to video games because it's becoming one of the most popular mediums in the world. So
Yeah, for sure. I do think showing other one of my kind of points that I always tell people is I always go keep a hand climbing that ladder while also having one hand kind of down to help other people get there too, because it won't just help them out in the future, it helps you out. If you open more doors for people, who knows, maybe they become some big CEO in the future and you get hired by them just because you help them. Like, it's you help as many
it,
people as you can. You work even if they're not the greatest people, just like, be nice to them, work with them.
and you bring up a great point, right? Like that, all of that is 1,000% true. And I often think too, like, look, a lot of the times people can feel like they're helping people out for it to be transactional, right? Like I feel like that's like a feeling that some people get. But I think in the same breath, it's kind of like a lot of the people who founded this industry and kind of made it what it is today, like what everybody knows with these studios. These are people who have been around in the industry for 30 years, 40 years, if not more. They've shaped where it's at now. And I feel like the I'm using air quotes, responsibility of us now in the industry is to kind of help the ones coming up to help shape this new wave that is coming in. Because we don't like what they've been doing for the past 40 years, clearly, with everybody's opinions about layoffs and how CEOs take money and stuff like that. Like we have now moved into this more progressive era where, we're helping people try to get into the industry, but also helping people who are trying to help just the general vibe of the entire industry and move it forward rather than being like, well, we made record profits, so we're going to go ahead and kind of cut the cord here. Not to say that like some studios have to do that. Like they don't have room to be trying to, you know, keep everybody. So I totally get that. But there are points and groups who will let people go to meet a bottom dollar to feed shareholders, right? So giving back to people and helping them into the industry, it's kind of like you said, you don't actually know who you're talking to because one day that person could end up changing the whole fabrication of what the industry as we know it is today. Like we talk about, Jeff Keighley runs the Game Awards. One day it's not going to be him. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it's all about guiding the next one's up and the next one's up and the next one's up because all they're doing is shaping the industry going forward. That's all that's happening. The people who've been around for 40 years, they're kind of leaving because it's over now. Now you got the new group kind of coming in and then they're going to shape it. The people who've been in the industry for like 10, 15 years, then that's going to go away and then it's just going to keep repeating. So I'm all about helping people out and helping people, you know, just being nice, kind of like what you said, just helping them, giving them a helping hand because I don't know if, helping out 10 people, one of those people could end up actually changing the industry for the better. Or there could be two people who make it worse, but you don't really know. But it's still the fact that you're helping somebody else out.
For sure, yeah. I had a really, really good professor last year in my game programming class. His name was Tom. I cannot. His last name is really hard to pronounce for me. Suliopis, I think it is.
There you go.
But he always was really good at sharing the learning with others and told us to tell all of our friends about this, like share it with other people, just kind of get people to learn as well on top of us learning, because when you teach other people, when you show other people, like you really what's the word for it? You learn more. He always used to tell us, do Ubisoft next, which is a huge thing in Toronto. I don't know if it is over there in Colorado, but do it, like do Ubisoft next if you can. Even if you're a year one, he always used to say that to us, do as much as you can to further your career, to advance your learning, do what you can, because like most people would just sit there and be like, I'll get a job when I graduate. I don't need to do anything else but my schoolwork. Well, it doesn't work that way. We had a couple of people come on and talk about this, especially in Toronto. They graduated from George Brown, and they were like, yeah, I didn't get a job just from my schoolwork. They looked at my other projects and was like, oh my God, this is really cool. I talked to a couple of people who, and this is more developers in general, not just game programmers, but he did say, in all honesty, like, if you have, like, a really good portfolio project like on your portfolio, like it that's gonna matter more than your where you were taught schooling. Like of course there's those internships with Waterloo, University McMaster's, all these big schools. However, if you have a really good first project on there that they see and like it's open source or whatever, they're gonna be like, okay, that's actually really cool. And that's what he told me, that's what that recruiter told me, which I thought was really interesting.
No, that's 100% right. There's very few schools, if you ask me, that are direct links to the game industry. I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to can you do it? It's not a matter of like the days of just completing school and then getting the degree and then going into the industry are kind of over. It's a matter of like if you do that, that's cool, amazing. We're gonna look at that and be like, okay, well you saw college through, which is a big deal because not everybody can, including myself. I dropped out, but like there also is a side of it that goes, well, what's the work that they've done in that time frame from even after graduating because it's a little bit stale right now in terms of jobs. They look at that type of stuff, right? Um, I think another good thing to note too that I've talked to a bunch of different recruiters and I always try to like share game to a bunch of people that I talk to. Recruiters love seeing portfolios that mirror what they're making at the studio. That's a pretty popular talking point that a lot of people have brought up, but it is incredibly true. Say you want to work at Naughty Dog and say you want to work on The Last of Us. You're like, I love that type of game. Neil Druckmann just kind of confirmed part three. So we should like, all right, I want to try to make something. Then what you should look at doing is, say if you're a level designer, trying to make a level that is based off of something that they already make, right? Like, so that way when a recruiter goes and they do exactly what you're just talking about, wow, this looks so great. Not only does it look good, but you're already kind of thinking in the light of what the studio is making. You know what the studio is making. So, post-apocalyptic level, overgrown tree or overgrown roads, trees and moss and ivy and overturned cars and burned out cars and stuff like that. They can see that and go, okay, well, they have the understanding of the vibe that our games get. And then, if you add your own little cool twist on it, then again, it gets to thinking in this mindset of like, okay, well, this LD is already kind of thinking, and you never know. You may end up bringing up something in your portfolio that they hadn't thought about for a game that they're making, and you have no idea. It's funny enough, that's exactly kind of what happened and led me to my job at EA. I was in the interview and I was bringing up like design philosophies and stuff, and there was a question that they brought up, and then one of the lead designers was like, "Yeah, well, we actually haven't thought of that, and that's actually a really cool idea. Could you expand on that?" And that's what tends to lead people to jobs because you know, you're already kind of doing the job per se. You know what I mean, without even actually being there, and that impresses a lot of people and often leads to a job. So
Yeah, for sure. And I've actually read an article recently about how Harvard graduates actually couldn't find it. This was in the business department, but they couldn't find jobs, and there's a lot of reasons why that is. But to me, at
yeah,
least, some of the biggest reasons has always been, what did you do outside of school? Did you just go through Harvard and did your work? Like, sure,
yeah,
you learned a lot, but what real outward outside experience do you have? You can gain those 3 years experience by doing your own projects. Like, it's not
yeah.
impossible. You can do that, but a lot of people don't do that or don't realize that early on, and then it becomes a problem later on when they want to get an actual job after they graduate.
Yeah. No, again, 100%. You're so right. Like, you can't, it's not enough to literally graduate and be like, well, I'll get a job with what I did in school. Like, now, if you ask me, the game industry is very much somewhat of a hustle to get in, especially if you're newer. It's a hustle of networking with people, getting to know folks who work in the industry, getting to know folks who work at your favorite studios or the five or six that you want to work at. Actively working on your portfolio, even after school. I think there's another side of it too that people don't really like to hear, but I think that they should, is that, I know this is a dream job for a lot of people. I know a lot of people would like to do this and kind of, you know, have this be their only thing that they're doing. But I worked in a warehouse in Arizona summers where it was 118 degrees while working on sun to eventually lead me into the game industry. And I think a lot of people should be, holding themselves up while they can, however that looks. Whether it's living at home, whether it's doing your own things, whether you're supported, not supported, doesn't really matter. It's just, doing you on the side and holding yourself up while you're trying to get into the industry. So it's an active process even after you graduate. It's not enough to just graduate and be like, I'll get a job anymore.
For sure, yeah. Um, yeah, and by the way, just for everyone, I'm gonna put it in the YouTube link as well. But for you guys to see in the chat, I actually put the Game Developers Conference in there as well, so you can kind of see what that's about. I'm not sure if any of it's online or not. I haven't actually looked into it properly, but I did think that's a great opportunity just to look at and
Yeah.
kind of see.
Yeah, GDC is a fantastic place. GDC is a great place to not only network with folks, but also learn about the structuring of how this industry kind of works because everybody is there. Everybody. So it's one of those weird things of like, if you can go, cool. If you can't, that's also kind of cool because you don't really lose anything that you couldn't do through Twitter or LinkedIn or something to that effect. But if you can, check out GDC. It's fantastic. To me, it's a fantastic event. It's just completely overpriced.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's actually the same
Yeah.
with Collision. It's $700. However, they did a
Yeah.
fun little thing where if you have a GitHub, you can actually get it in for free, which is
Oh, that's
really cool
cool.
to me. And I think that should be done a lot more with these conferences, giving maybe like even if you have a student number, put that in so we can get you in for a cheaper price or something like that. Because I believe students should be at these events, and it's not just those, because a lot of the larger universities and colleges, they do that where they'll pay for you to go, but the problem is a lot of the smaller ones don't do anything like that. And I know it's not like necessarily their fault, but I do believe that like giving the option to anyone from any school to go to these events and see what's up, because who knows, maybe the next like, I'm gonna say this very vaguely here, but maybe the next like GitHub CEO is going to be someone out of, let's say, Georgetown College, for example. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
happens. It's been done. It's been seen. Like, Bill Gates was a dropout, right, of Harvard. So
Yeah.
it's actually cool what people can do.
No, I totally agree with that. I think you never know. You never know who's going to show up to those type of things, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier. Of just like, whenever if, whatever you can get into the industry, it doesn't hurt to help and reach back out because you don't know who that person is going to become in some fashion. Could be the person that makes the next. It could this next wave, right? Like EA's and Rockstar and all these studios are so solidified that they're never going to fail. But we're still looking for that next wave. We're still looking for the next new 10 to 15 studios that are like household names. So you never know who that's going to be.
For sure, yeah. So I think we've definitely had a little rant about this. I really like that
Yes.
conversation. I get into it way too much.
Same.
So that is interesting. I think having an understanding of what it means between an actual game developer, like a AAA game developer, versus an indie game developer, is extremely important to know. I would love if you have any advice on what you should do after you graduate. Let's say, for example, I know you said you dropped out and that stuff, but how did you break
Mhm.
into the industry? We kind of talked about it a little bit, but do you have any tips and tricks for students right now, especially for us right now, who are kind of getting ready to get into the industry, even if they're not graduating, they're on their first or second year, and they're like, I really want to just do something, make a project or something like that. Do you have any advice there?
Yeah. So the very first thing I would say, if you're interested, so there's two paths to me. There's two paths. You can take the indie route and then you can work your way up to AAA, or you could stay in indie and never go out of that. So technically three paths, or do AAA. So if you're trying to take the indie route, so we'll take my example. If you're trying to go indie to eventually get to AAA, I think it is incredibly important to know that if you're an indie developer, you will be a form of a generalist, whatever discipline that you're in. This could be design, art, programming, producer, or production in that sense. You're going to be a generalist, and what I mean by that is, if you don't know, if you're a level or if you're a game designer, you could technically be a tech designer, a level designer, combat designer, a gameplay designer, live content even. It's all over the place. And I say that because indies don't have as much money as the AAA guys. AAA guys got 300 million to spend on a project, and indies have about $1 million. So you kind of gotta. It is very,
Yeah.
very, very small. So with that comes, smaller teams in indies. So if you're a person that likes to work on smaller teams, you feel like you like to work on a bunch of different things, I think indie is the route for you. And I say that because, you know, you get a lot of wiggle room. You get a lot of kind of creativity and freedom in an indie sense, or a triple I, or whatever that they call it now. Um, to counter that, I don't want to put anybody's AAA dreams down, but if you go into AAA, you are very much going to be one lane, especially coming in. So if you want to be a game designer, chances are you'll probably be a very specific lane person in the game design umbrella. So the example I keep using is the example that I came in as, which was a level designer. You'll get hired as a very specific thing, and then you will do that very specific thing and part of a whole team and a group of people, and then you will launch said title. And then if you feel like being a generalist, or if you feel like, I've been playing Tiny Tina enough, and I know how to do gameplay design with a focus on weapons or something like that, specifically for that studio. Then you could probably go to your lead and be like, "Hey, I think not only can I do level design, but if you let me balance like some gameplay mechanics or even weapons, that would be really cool because I've gotten good at this." During AAA prototyping phase, a lot of people get to kind of do fun things and jump around a little bit. Every studio is different, but the ones that I have been at have I've been blessed enough to do that. And if you're good at it and you build that trust with your lead, typically people become generous that way. That's kind of how people go about that process. Um, but yeah, I think it is important to kind of when you're coming out of college and you graduate, you should definitely be thinking about what route you want to take. Do you want to go straight AAA? Do you want to go right to indie where you have a little bit more freedom? AAA is a lot of learning. Like, you know, you don't get as much freedom in AAA because things are set in stone and made by decisions a whole lot higher. So it's one of those like kind of harsh realities that kind of hits you like cold water, so to speak, your like first day. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people think they come in and just make up decisions or like, X, Y, and Z, but things are set in stone for the most part. You don't really get that freedom until a couple of years down the line, which a lot of people are okay with because you get to make some of the coolest games in the world. Shout out to Morgan. She just got a job over at Harry Potter, and she's a combat designer over at Avalanche. And that's like her dream studio. So it's one of the cool things for her to actually get to do. You know what I mean? It's one of the it just varies from person to person. If you want a little bit more freedom and you don't really know what position you kind of want to like buckle down and do, I try to go indie. I really would. There's a lot of indies out there, funded and not funded, that are looking for people to kind of help them grow. And again, just one of those instances, and it is kind of like hitting the lottery in a weird way. But you work at one of these indies, and next thing you know, one of these indies ends up being um, uh, like Lethal Company or something like that. That game and that guy that made that studio, or Hades is another great example. Um, just kind of which route that you want to take, and there's a couple ways to do it. So just pick which route you want to go, and then kind of work off that.
Yeah, you don't want to have your. I mean, like, as much as I enjoy, because I'll you kind of use for me an example. I had when I was doing game programming, because I'm not in the course anymore. I had three different mindsets right now. I want to be a game programmer. I want to do engineering, and then I wanted to do software development. But the problem was I was getting nowhere with that. Um, that like lifestyle. I think the phrase it's a longer phrase, but I'm gonna kind of simple it down like master jack of all trades but master of none. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's an amazing way to look at it. Like, you're not going to go far with all of these paths at once. Pick a path
Mm-hmm.
to go through, and who knows, maybe later on in life it will give you an option to go another path. Like, it will happen.
Yeah, 100%. Like trust yourself and pick which one that you like the most. Like I did my indie path. I made my game first, and I realized out of all the things that I did for that game, level design was the one that I enjoyed the most. So I'll try to go and just be a level designer, and that's kind of ended up what ended up happening. So, and now I've switched into like a generalist role, and that's kind of my role at EA. So it's like it's a weird space to be in initially, but kind of embrace it. But again, it really matters on which side of the fence you would like to go down, and they're both interchangeable. So don't think if you go AAA that you can't go indies. I know I can't even count how many people who have done 20 years in AAA that now are going indie. And on the flip side of that, there's a ton of people who have done the indie route and gone to AAA and loved it. So you can do both. You can hop both sides of that fence. That's not a too high a fence to go over.
Well, yeah, actually, Tamerlin, I'm gonna say his last name. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. Tahirli. He was one of our Talk Night speakers a little bit ago. He was working at Ubisoft Toronto as a gameplay programmer for about almost 2 years, give or take. And he shipped a lot of games. Like he did Far Cry, one of the DLCs for Far Cry 6. That was amazing. And
Yeah.
now he's created his own company and he's working on his own games now. Like, he's
Yeah.
been successful in that way. I think that's a great example of what you can do later on. You get a job anywhere and it can work. If you work on projects, like, you never know, maybe they'll keep your name for the future. Who knows what could happen. Just, work for whoever you can. I mean, well, there's obviously people that you should be wary of, but
Yeah, yeah. And I think, and again, that I know right now, Blizzard and Activision, those are kind of hot names with the past history they've had in the past 5 years. But I know a lot of people who work there, and I know a lot of people who say they will never leave. So it's a matter of, it's important to talk to people who actually work in that studio because a lot of them, confidentially and through DMs and stuff, will kind of tell you. they'll let you know. Always do your own research. That is imperative. If you want to go work for a studio in Tencent or a studio in Embracer Group, just kind of know what you're getting yourself into. That's all. And if you are looking around and you start to hear things and they just don't align with, your values and your morals, then that's kind of a call that you would have to make from a standpoint of, do I just want to get into the industry any way that I can, or do I kind of want to take a different road because it just doesn't align with what I want to got or what I want to do in the industry. And again, that's different from everybody. So
For sure, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting actually. I think that's knowing what each industry does and how each industry, and we've asked this question to a lot of people, but I believe all these different views of it's really important. When you come from different companies and different places, it's all a different experience. But when you learn from all these people, it's slowly like, you kind of know where to go now. Or at least you have an idea where what to do, which I think is
yeah, I
important.
will. I'll say this too. I've worked at now what feels like the one of or two at least of the five biggest studios in the world. Uh, EA and Gearbox, even down to Lost Boys, and you can talk to anybody, people who work at Rocksteady, people who work at Rockstar, people who work at Naughty Dog, Santa Monica. For the most part, it's kind of the same. It really is. They kind of use the same softwares. They use it in the same manner. Everybody uses Miro, Confluence, and all these like software pieces. How they make games is a little bit different, but how they kind of approach things is kind of all the same. So you don't ever really got to panic too much when you're inside of the industry of being like, well, I'm gonna have to pivot crazy and like have to really get pushed outside of here. And because for the most part, a lot of that stuff is a lot of that stuff is similar. It's familiar. How about that? It's familiar that you'll see and be like, okay, I kind of know how to move from here.
For sure, yeah. All right, so I actually do have another question as well. Um, so let's kind of pivot a little bit here. I want to hear about I guess you kind of talked about how did you get into the industry, but
Mm.
did you do any internships? Is there any options right now for internships competitions around the world for students? Let's say they're year three, or year four, or whatever, trying to graduate. Is there anything you would recommend to a student right now?
I would probably say, well, there's some internships. A lot of them have like summer and fall ones. Those are the only ones that I have ever really seen. As far as like competition and stuff, like I've never really seen anything like that. But internships at like Santa Monica, I've seen a couple over there. I've seen internships at Insomniac Games. As we're all aware, it's a hard time in the industry right now. So internships get a little dicey at the AAAs because a lot of them are already cutting back money. Some of them have just laid off people. The whole internship vibe is just not kind of the move right now. But I know one person who actually got an internship at Sony, and he's working at the San Diego studios. So the big, big, big companies do have internships. So I think you should look at those and time it up from, right after graduation, or some of them do it like your last year graduation or last semester. I can't really recall. But pay attention to a lot of those. You're not really going to get those crazy internship opportunities from, mid-tier studios. It's typically from what I have seen. I could be wrong because I don't know too much about this, but I've seen them from only like the big, big, big players. But I do think it is worth noting that if you can't find that, I think you should absolutely look around at the indie scene. I know we kind of already talked about it, but it's not an internship necessarily, but it's good experience. It can teach you to work with a small group that kind of is already doing their own thing, paid or unpaid, depending on how you view that. But again, that's another situational thing of just kind of seeing what it's like to be responsible for something that a team is kind of counting on you for, what it's like to work with a small group, what it's like to go through a development process, because that's oftentimes a little shocking to a lot of people. Like you get it in school, right? Like it's very stepped out and you have certain days to hit, but it's a lot different when you get into these studios and then you got a deadline of 2 days from now and they need that. They like producers are asking you, hey, where's it at? Like you got it going. So I think it's also important to like, if you can't find anything at a big AAA studio, hit up a lot of indies. You could probably get an internship as long as it just doesn't go out against how you feel about unpaid or paid internships. You should never, I mean, I'll just say this for the record's sake, you should never take an unpaid internship and be doing 40 hours a week. That is ridiculous on all fronts. Um, but if you can dedicate, 10, 15 hours of your time or even 20 or however that looks to you, I think it's worth it if you can't get a AAA one.
For sure, yeah. I've seen even student projects at George Brown where people expect you to put in one of the projects I worked on actually. I won't go into the name or anything, but one of the projects I did
Yeah.
work on, um they were great people. Like everyone there was amazing, but they expected so much out of you as a
Yeah.
programmer. They expect a lot out of you. And
Oh yeah.
especially if you only have a small group of people, they don't give you that long of a time span to do the project sometimes, and that's when you kind of have to step your foot in and learn to say no, I'm not going to do that much in this time period. And
Yep.
sometimes it's just better to say you're off the project than you're doing it. As much as it's hard to say, sometimes you have
Yeah.
to keep your mental health going.
100%. Yeah. Don't, please, anyone in this call, don't do unpaid internships and ask to be like crunched and work 50 hours a week. No unpaid internship that I can think of that has ever existed needed to be done that bad. So do something that takes care of your mental, do something that you feel is fun, do something that you feel you're interested in, and then work on that.
Yeah. Plus, usually they're like shadowing over people, anyways. So if you're
Yeah.
doing that much, I
Yeah.
don't know if you're actually
Yeah.
shadowing them or you're like, I don't know. It
Yeah.
feels more like a job. But yes,
100%.
interesting. All right. So another question I would like to ask, and this is going to be, I'd say one of the final ones that I have out of my list.
Okay.
Um, so your job at EA. So I would like to know. I think we talked about this a very tiny bit. But
Mm.
how did you how did you get your current job? If you're allowed to talk about that. How what steps did you take to get this job?
Mm.
Beforehand. So, for example, making your indie game, that kind of stuff. And
Mm.
how do you feel about it right now?
So what I do right now is I'm a game designer at EA. I've worked on Madden. I've worked on college football that's coming out. There's a different balance that when you're working at EA and you're working on a proprietary engine versus working at a place like Lost Boys where I was a level designer working in Unreal Engine 5. Um, you know, I was a little skeptical going in because I was like, I don't know how to use proprietary stuff, but I think it's a good challenge, right? It's a good challenge to learn studios that have their own engines and not Unreal Engine or Unity or anything like that. And you have to kind of adapt because there are big studios out there that I would love to work for, or love to like see the inner workings of, and they have their own engines and own ways of working through their own problems. So how I kind of got into that and I stepped my way into EA is it's funny because EA, where I specifically work, is EA Sports. It's Tiburon in Florida. Uh, they they're a sports studio. I played football. I played college ball. I played high school ball. I was ranked in ESPN. All those things. So I kind of have an understanding of football in general. So it was kind of like a match made in heaven, at least from their end, because I had played college football. I know the game. I played receiver. I kind of know a lot of things, and eventually it just led into them being like, well, we're making college football, so I think you would be a fantastic fit on that. So that's kind of how that led into like that situation. If you wanted to back it up a little bit more, because that's a very one-off type of situation. If you want to back up a little bit more to how I ended up working at Lost Boys was I shipped my own game, and my mentor Chase Jones, shout out to Chase Jones, that's my guy. He he knows that if someone were to go through a process like that and launch their own game, they'll be perfectly fine adapting to a AAA like pipeline and how to like development cycle. And he was right. I adapted fairly well because I went from doing everything to just doing my one job I got to focus on and actually getting paid a salary for it. So that was very much like getting into the industry. Uh, Non EA sports was very much my portfolio. I have an art station. It should be a website, but I have an art station. I made a bunch of level design stuff, and then the game that I had shipped. And then yeah, not the funnest answer, but my step to EA genuinely was me knowing a lot about college football, and they I mean, the timing was perfect because the last time a college football game came out was 10 years ago, and I just happened to be around in the industry, and they were looking. So,
That's great, honestly. Like the little things, sometimes the stuff you know works out for you in the end.
oh yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So I do have one more question, but I am going to ask. We do have quite a couple of Q&A questions, so I'm going to quickly transition over there first.
cool.
Um, all right. So our first question. I don't know if you answered this one or not, but from Jade, she asked, since generally creatives take a lot of inspiration from other games, how do you keep your project's authenticity slash your original vision?
Totally. So, here, Jade, I will give you a piece of advice that not a lot of people in the industry know, or outside of the industry know, or really people who work in the industry that are a little bit newer. There's probably, I don't even know the percentage, and I'm probably going to get backlash on it. It's like 1% of the studios that are making games out there are authentic or original visions. Most of them come from something. So to kind of like answer your creative inspiration part is like, looking at a game like Helldivers. I don't know if a lot of people seen the breakdown of like Helldivers, but Helldivers, the movement, the style, a lot of that is based off of Metal Gear Solid. Even the diving and the crawling and the rolling and everything like that is based off of Metal Gear. So a lot of studios do that exact same thing. Now they find that through all types of projects. I've seen directors play indies for 4 weeks straight, all types of indies, from 2 hour long indies to 10 hours, and they'll take bits and pieces that they actually like that kind of pertain to the game that we're making, and throw that into what we're doing, but we'll add our own twist on it. If I'm being honest, that's about 98% of the industry. I think the only ones you don't really find that in, and it sounds insane, is probably Kojima's Death Stranding. That's probably one of the rare ones that you find. It's like, well, who made a game that you just deliver stuff and walk around all day? You know what I mean? Like a big major studio. That was kind of like the only one. But outside of that, like for the most part, a lot of the original visions don't exist. But project's authenticity and the vision or the thing that we're trying to enhance in the industry kind of is all the same. From a shooter standpoint, you know, sometimes it can be, well, boots on the ground turns into, well, how can we put this in space? And that's kind of where Starfield comes into battle. Like it's Starfield is identical to Fallout, it's just in space. Like in a lot of games that kind of make that same similar thing. Call of Duty could make that argument. Um, Suicide Squad can make that argument. It's a lot of the same. It's just kind of reskinned a little bit. Um, but as long as you're adding your own twist on it and people know that, like, oh, this is a Rockstar game. Oh, this is a Activision game. This is a uh, you know, From Software or ID or something like that. So
I think you said it beautifully. I have absolutely nothing to add on to there. And that very last bit was probably the only bit I would have added on. Like, yeah, it's important. Like, just have your own twist on it. We'll
yeah,
see where
just
it goes from there.
take inspiration from a lot of games, right? Like play a bunch of different games. You're in the game industry, play everything, literally everything. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be Barbie all the way to Elden Ring. Play
Yep.
a bunch of it because there's stuff in there. There's elements of design in there that are unique. And a lot of times, AAA industry doesn't have time to be trying to make something wildly crazy. So that's why I love indies and I shoot up indies, because indies, there's a lot of experiment. You want to see a fun experiment and them just doing totally off the wall, backroom shit. They do it.
Yeah,
So
I get
that's
that.
indies the vibe. So if you ever want to do that, AAA is fun, but stick to indies.
Oh yeah, for sure. And having like that. Yeah, that's really important. I think it goes for any industry. Like, use social media for example. Just use it to get ideas, get inspiration. Sometimes a quick search online is all you need, and now you have so much inspiration you can do. That's how I worked some of the applications I'm developing. I went online, I went on multiple GitHubs just to find similar projects and how they built themselves and how they did it. And I learned a lot from
Exactly.
that. So, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
All right. So, another question from Waluigi Fox. Is Sun on any other platform right now?
Sun is not on any other platform. Sun is just on PlayStation. Trying to get it on. Xbox and PC at the time would have just melted me. So I just did PlayStation and never looked back.
That's very fair. Well, look where I got you now. So honestly,
Yeah,
that's completely fair. Stick to one for now. Later on, if it becomes
yeah,
successful, you can do that.
yeah. If you want to, more power to you. I've had publishers approach me and just be like, "Do you want to put this on other platforms?" And I just it's a lot of work, and it's a almost 5 year old game, so it'll be fine. Leave it alone.
For sure, yeah. Okay, so another question from Jade. So she asked another question I have is how do you pitch your project to PlayStation and what makes a good pitch? And
Oh,
I'm gonna quickly add on. 'Cause she had another connecting part of this. Which aspect of the pitch did you actually focus on? Was it storytelling, metrics, gameplay, etc., and why?
so that's the fun part. So whenever you're pitching something, so if you're pitching something as a developer, you only have to kind of worry about this one thing, right? Like if they're asking you to make a level, you're pitching a level. Now, we're talking in the context of like pitching a game to a major platform. So you're pitching it, and this is important to know if you want to start your own studio, you're pitching your game from a business standpoint. So you're talking about your game from literally what it is, like the elevator pitch, like that one line, what is this? All the way down to comparisons and like who this game is compared to and how much that game sold and how many copies have they pushed. It is a whole thing in between that. Um, I mean, everything that you've named in there, you're touching on storytelling, metrics, gameplay, design. Oh my goodness, comparisons to another game that you would put it in the same ballpark with. Like I tried to compare Sun to like Blair Witch Project on my pitch. So it's like you're pitching everything. You need to talk about the game from literally start to finish, from 0 to 1, as they say. So now, when you're pitching to PlayStation from a business standpoint, you're pitching on why this game can not only sell, but what makes it fun from a story, from gameplay, from character development, all of that. It all kind of ties in. Now, if you're indie and you're super small like me, like they'll give you a break. They'll cut you a break. They won't be like, you know, there's studios out there that are probably giving PlayStation GDDs that are probably 300 pages long, but they'll cut you a break. But you're still pitching your game from a business standpoint, and it needs to be like from A to Z, genuinely.
Okay, so instead of let's say I'm pitching the game to what do you call them again? Like a manager, a game like a manager of a game. I guess that's not the best word to say, but instead of pitching the game to an indie team that may be more associated with the industry, you're pitching it to these executives who are like business people. Like you got to kind of.
Yeah, and in this sphere, there's multiple ways of going about it. Like if you're pitching a game to PlayStation to another person that can fund this game and give you like $1 million to make it, then yeah, like you're pitching your company, the game, everything is wrapped up behind that. If you're pitching to like just get put on the platform and you're publishing it from your own studio and you don't need any money or anything like that, you're still kind of doing the same thing, but just dumbed down a little bit. Like you're just talking about like, hey, this is what I'm making. Here's a genre. Here's the comparisons. Here's the story. Here's the gameplay mechanics behind it. Here's a cool twist that I'm putting on it from this game that you've known and love over here. And then the last stage of that is like if you worked at a AAA studio and you're trying to pitch something to someone, you would just pitch an individualized section that you're working on. So it's different tiers for sure.
Interesting. Okay, I think that's a very good answer to that question. I also was interested in that question myself, so I do think that was great. And I'm gonna let you guys, I'll let you guys keep asking questions. If you have questions, just throw them in. I will keep asking them as they go. Please, if you do have questions, keep asking because we don't get this experience every day, and I do think it's kind of important to understand this, especially for people who are currently looking for jobs in the industry. Like I know a couple people who are, and who are kind of struggling to look for them. And again, reference is always the best way to go about it, at least from what I've seen. But yeah,
Yeah, I would if no one has two questions or anyone has any questions at the moment, I would love to give just some advice that I don't think is talked about very much, if that's cool.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I think there's two things, right? The first thing is always post your stuff on LinkedIn because you're never not bothering nobody like any work that you have, like post it all. I would post a lot of like work in progress stuff or just stuff that can show like what you're making and X, Y, and Z. I have been recruited through that way, um, through other studios and whatnot. I've been interviewed just by posting stuff. I'm not a lighting artist, but I was approached by a studio and they were like, "Hey, like, do you want to chat? Let's hold a conversation because you light stuff really well." I think that's a matter of just like posting things online, right? Like I don't think it's a matter of like being overly good at it. Just post things, like if you're in a work in progress on a level design, post it. If you're making a new feature, post it. I think that's a big topic and a big um, discussion point with a lot of recruiters who live on LinkedIn. I always say if you want to be popular with devs, go on Twitter. You want to be popular with like recruiters and some people who can get you kind of in the door, not from a dev standpoint. LinkedIn's going to be your best friend. Um, the second thing is, I think it's incredibly important to know that the best piece of advice that I ever got was from my mentor Chase, and he said to treat the industry like a business. It is a dream job. It is something that a lot of people would love to do. It is something that is you're incredibly privileged to even be doing this in the first place. I think that just kind of goes without saying. But it is a business. It is a business at the end of the day. And what I mean by that is like there's a point of emotional standpoint that you kind of got to take out of it because at the end of the day this studio is here because the business needs to run and they run off of money. They're going to make things that make the studio money. Sequels, prequels, remakes, remasters. That's the kind of the vibe that you're starting to see because they're stockpiling money to get put into the next thing. I think you've all seen Sean Layden talk about the industry is getting so big now and the games are getting so complex and they're costing so much money that it's either hit or miss. These $300 million games have to make at least 400 back. I would imagine. Make their money back plus and then some. That they're going to do is just dump that money into the next game anyway. So um, pay attention to a lot of the industry. The good thing I like to tell people is go on every day and read GameIndustryBiz.com. Look at what they're talking about. You know what I mean? Like just kind of or a different outlet, IGN, whoever you want to use. Just start chatting. Just start like or start reading things. It's important to just kind of know where the industry is at. I think it's important to know what your studio is doing. They often have shareholder calls. I'm not saying you got to sit on those boring things, but I think it's important to at least know what's going on. Are you in a financial rut at that studio? Like not you individually, but the studio itself. Are you noticing morale is really bad? Are you starting to see a lot of the writings on the wall? I think a lot of times, people of all positions have told me like, and I've been guilty of it too, right? Like I've 100% been guilty of it. Of just like you don't look at that. You get so caught up in where you're at, and you're like, oh my god, like I made it, and then you kind of get blindsided by things. So it's important to just treat it like a business. And when you're in, enjoy every second of it. Meet as many friends as you can. Love what you do. It's an incredible industry full of incredible people. But pay attention. I think that's the biggest point I'm getting at. It's just pay attention to a lot of factors that don't necessarily portray directly to game development because they are very telling. So,
For sure, yeah. Spread the positive energy when you can. It's really important.
100%, 100%.
Yeah, that's I love that advice. I think that's really important nowadays, especially the LinkedIn part. Actually, Shimran here, who's actually in the call right now, he I like the LinkedIn post he does where he is making a game and he kind of posts about each different thing on his game. What is this? What
Mm-hmm.
is that? I think that's really interesting. How like people are seeing this now. It's not just like they're seeing this one single post where it's like here's my game. It's like okay, there's one post, but now you've got like 3 or 4 different clips of the game, and people keep
Yep.
seeing it on their feed slowly. And when you actually do make that big post saying your game's out or whatever it is, you're gonna have so many more people following you and watching you.
Yep. And I think if you're just trying to do it from a standpoint of like just working in the industry, a lot of times like posting your updates, you never know who's watching. A recruiter could be looking at that and be like, "Oh, that looks kind of cool," so I'll just like sneakily follow you. And the next thing you know, you keep posting things, and they're like, "Oh, this is getting better and better and better," and then they reach out to you through DMs. So
It's really cool. Yeah. Okay. So a couple more questions come in. All right, we got a question from Heartnote here. Have you experienced any unionization efforts at big studios?
I personally have not, but I have just read that Activision and all of them over, yeah, all of the, well, QA over at Activision made unionization efforts. So I mean, I can't speak on EA because I don't know of any. There may be some that are behind the scenes, but I just haven't seen it. Lost Boys was too small to, I think, for that to actually happen. And in Gearbox, we were a little bit separated. So a little bit of a bland, dry answer. No, but I've seen other studios like try to make the rounds for it for sure.
For sure, yeah. I definitely think it's quite hard to answer sometimes because sometimes you don't even know what's going on in the whole
Yeah.
thing unless you are like a
That-
leader or someone who is pushing for that. I'd love to speak to someone who's pushing for unions, kind of understand
mhm.
why they're pushing for it, what's happening, what are the struggles of that. I think that's something that should be known, not just to people who want to start a union, but to everyone, even execs. Like, how can they help their company? You know, that kind of stuff.
No, 100%. And 100%. I think a lot of people, a lot of that is very hidden because if a lot of that gets out, then that can be kind of corrupted by execs, right? They can kind of shut that off. So I think a lot of it is very, very internal and very secretly done. And then when they're ready to step out and be like, hey, we're forming this together, then it's kind of when it kind of takes everybody by notice. So, when Activision and that QA group made that, that was very I'm sure that was very coordinated and very private internally, and then they came out about it. So that's what I'm saying. It could very well be being done in EA. I just have no idea about it. So only one I've seen is Activision, and good for them.
For sure, yeah. Okay, so here's a question from Gabriel now. So games like Helldivers 2 that are not AAA and have a lot of success, what, or like they, sorry, give me a second just to read this one more time.
There you go.
Um, so do you think games like that motivate you to make more games that people would like or love, or has any of those kind of games motivated you by playing them?
Yeah, I think they push the boundary of fun. I think that's first and foremost, right? Like I think a lot of times we can get caught up in trying to follow a formula that works, and we just want to, make this game because it's going to make a lot of money. But at the same time, there's games like Helldivers that just is fun. It's just a fun game. I think at its core, it really showed a lot of people of just like, here's what happens when you listen to community, because that's one, the CEO has been great. Two, make it memeable. And three, it's again, it's just fun. It's just something that you can load up with your friends and go in and go play. Lethal Company is a fantastic example of that as well. Pow World is another great example of that. In today's day and age, I think we're starting to kind of see, at least from the smaller side of things that don't have a lot of money invested into it, is that one, is it fun? Just basically fun. Doesn't matter if it's the most prettiest game in the world. Is it fun? Is it something you can sit down, laugh at, smile at, cry at, whatever, however that looks? Is it fun? And I think Helldivers is an incredible example of that because all they did was expand on the first game that they had made and then added a bunch of things that, you can play with your friends and like just go batshit crazy on whatever enemy that you're fighting in that level. You know what I mean? Like I've only ever seen the hug memes, and they found workarounds to like not get blown up from doing that, and they'll step off or they'll get on a pod or something like that, and they'll be giving each other hugs from memes and stuff. Like it's stuff like that that I think it motivates a lot of folks in AAA to try to pitch that to a lead or an exec and see how far it goes. But no, to answer your question though, it motivates all of us all of the time. Power World got a lot of shit, but a lot of people looked at that and went, "Oh, that's just so fun! Like it just, how can we incorporate that?"
I mean, that's kind of when you know your game is successful. How
Yeah,
other
yeah,
companies want to incorporate elements of your game into it. Like that's cool.
yeah.
That's when you know you've actually created something. Not necessarily original, but unique.
Yep, something that is just unique enough that that you literally sit down and go, oh, this is this is fun. I can play this. This is fun. So
For sure, yeah. And okay, so one question from me actually. I'm sort of in the process of developing a little list of just for the bike club, just things that like students should focus on when they want to go the industry. What does companies use? Like, what tools do they use? Do you have any specific tools? Because I know you mentioned it before. Any specific tools that you've used in your AAA companies so far? So, like EA or Gearbox, Lost Boys, that kind of stuff. Any kind of tools that you would use or recommend people to learn beforehand?
uh, oh, this is an NDA dance question.
Oh, is oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I think, yeah, no, there's ways. So I think first and foremost, I think the industry is leaning towards using Unreal Engine. I saw CD Projekt Red is even using Unreal Engine 5, which is insane to say the least. Using Unreal Engine is probably a really good first step. A lot of studios kind of ask for that requirement. To be honest with you, a lot of them are like, "Hey, have you used Unreal before? Cool. What extent?" I've been in quite a bit of interviews at big AAA studios, and they have asked me just point blank period, like, "Have you used AAA or UE5, Unreal Engine 5, or have you used 4? And if you did use 4, what was the difference between 4 and 5?" So I think using Unreal Engine is a really good one. Another thing is Mirrorboard. Mirrorboard is huge in the industry. A lot of people use Mirrorboard. Mirrorboard, if you don't know, is just literally a platform that it reminds me of a whiteboard where you just throw all your ideas on. That's kind of what it reminds me of. But there are teams of hundreds that use them. We use it at EA, we use it at Lost Boys, Gearbox, the whole nine. So Mira is a really good one just to kind of familiarize yourself with that. Confluence, Jira is task managing. I know quite a bit of studios that use Jira. Confluence is basically where all your game design documents go to live or die. So both of those are kind of, just basic softwares that you should be familiar with. You don't have to like know it inside out, especially if you're just an LD or something like that. Um, and then it really comes down to disciplines. Like if you're trying to be an artist, I can't speak too much for artists, but I've seen Maya come up a few times. Blender is now kind of like getting a revamp, but I think the artist would have a whole lot more to say, at least on that end. From the design side, yeah, just learn Unreal Engine, and learn visual scripting. That's another big one. Visual scripting, so like blueprints and stuff like that, because that could really help you out too in the interview process.
Interesting. Yeah, I think those are great. I am a Blender fanboy. I'm gonna say that right now.
Okay.
I talk to people who use 3ds Max and all this kind of in Maya and whatnot. I'm like, no, Blender. um,
Yeah.
but that's only because I've only used Blender. I like how it's open source. I'm a programmer. I love how it's open source and people can contribute to it. I believe that open source is going to be a huge future for a lot of people. Seeing these kinds of applications that are open source is a lot more. I find it a lot more safe to use for me at least. Like I know that this project, like I can manage it. I can read the code if I want to understand it, so I'm not like freaked out that this might be a virus. Unlike
Totally.
places like Autodesk, you don't have to comment on that. I just think that sometimes having more open kind of things is very important. But
No,
yes,
totally. Yeah, no, for sure.
but yeah, so that's great to know. I think those. I think it was about three of them that I really think are important. Have you ever
Mhm.
encountered Unity at all, or is it mostly Unreal?
I mean, I think some indies use Unity. I haven't come across a AAA that where they've talked mainly about Unity. It's only ever been Unreal. Um, but that's only in my, experience. It's been mostly Unreal. I've used Unity very briefly, but for the most part, it's been a lot of. Do you know UE5? So
For oh, there we go. There's my microphone. Um, for sure, yeah. I do think that Unreal is probably one of the more important engines nowadays. I believe it should be taught right away in schools, because actually, funny enough, what George Brown starts you off with, or at least what they did for me, was that they started me off with making my own engine. um, in my
Yeah.
first year, my first thing, and I can't say it wasn't bad because I have a lot of programming experience already going into it. However,
Yeah.
a lot of people that didn't went into it and went, okay, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing C++, like one of the harder languages to learn without knowing anything else? And why am I not using like Unity or Unreal or something like that, you know?
Definitely. Definitely.
I can't say anything about the design programs because I actually barely know anyone in the game design programs. However, yeah.
It's a it game does. I mean, programs. I don't know. I don't. I don't. I actually don't. I might be blanking on it, but I actually I don't know. I don't like outside of like just the general softwares that you always hear about. Um, that's probably the extent of my advice for it.
Yeah, which is fair.
Hmm.
What did I? Yeah, Shimron said the same thing. Yeah, being in game art before switching to game programming. I actually went from game programming to engineering, to now kind of
Okay.
pushing towards software development a lot more. So I kind of have situated myself back in this industry because I believe that there's a lot of aspects of games that actually apply to not just game development but the world. You look at places like competitions and that stuff. I've seen events like in business that are just like esports. That's all they are.
Yeah.
But they don't say that obviously because it obviously isn't an electronic sport. But in
Hmm.
reality, it's very much as similar to one. But yeah, like you see that everywhere. I think it's important for not just everyone to know about that.
Yeah. No. Totally. No, I agree. If you can find something like little game jams, that's kind of fun too. Like if you find like little game jams that you can do, sometimes you can win things out of there, and companies have those set up, kind of like what you're talking about. And a lot of times that brings a little bit of incentive. So that might be something to kind of look into.
Oh yeah, and it might not even just be winning a prize. Maybe it's like they're looking for the best. Like they're not even looking for the number one or number two. They might be looking for like the number five or something like that. Maybe you have such a unique
Yeah.
idea, they'll be like, "Oh my god, this is cool."
No, definitely. Sometimes they'll give you money. Sometimes it'll be like you brand new computer. It could be a whole bunch of things. So that might be something to actually look at.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mm.
But yes, that's I think all the questions I had. If anyone else has any, feel free to. If you have anything else to say, Jordan, of course, feel free to. Um,
Uh, I think my last parting thing really is just it looks bleak now. It looks dim. It really does. Just the industry kind of from the outside looking in looks very. We don't know what's going on, and to be fair, we don't. But I think it's important to just kind of say that it's not it's not the end of the world. It'll get better. It'll bounce back. We're all going through a phase right now where it's just not the most appealing, but it'll get there. It'll get back to where it needs to go. And you never know. You could be someone that ends up helping us out and move the needle forward and actually help a lot of the devs who make this industry run. So I think it's incredibly important. It's a dream job. It's something that we all love, but just remember to treat it like a business and move accordingly when you're inside. So
for sure, yeah, that's great parting words right here. Hold up, I see a chat here. Yeah, companies are preparing for a recession. Well, then again, you got to remember that this happened in COVID as well. Journalists got laid off. All the other industries got laid off. This is just the game, like the same thing, but happening to game dev now. Like it's not changing anything. Game dev boomed in the COVID scene. So many people got
yeah,
hired off of it, and now companies are now realizing, oh crap, like we hired too many people or that kind of stuff. It's not always the reason for it, but I do think that's something to keep in mind. Like you can't always be mad at them for that because you know they just have to do what they have to do. They saw a moment to expand and they did, but now they have like you said before. Sometimes you have to uh, like lay off people or whatnot. Now some of them are completely not really needed, but that's a whole different story for another day.
yeah, no, and I agree, right? Like I think the pandemic made a lot of studios more money than they had seen ever. And what ended up happening was they put a lot of bets in a lot of different things. And we have now gotten to the point where those aren't paying off. And we're not making games at a fast enough pace to where we can recoup that money that we spent out. So what ends up happening is, as you can probably guess, we're over. we're spending just too much money. It's not working. And we overhired at that time because we were trying to put in the bets in these certain places in hopes that it would make us a bunch of money. And that didn't come to fruition. And then now that's why you're seeing a lot of the layoffs. And I think you're seeing them in droves because of the consolidation that's going on in the industry as well. Microsoft consolidating Activision. Well, if you're at doubles at positions or even triples at positions, well, why would you keep any of that? You would just shave that off, right? Like and call it a write-off or whatever that they do at the end of the day. So a lot of those situations are different, but a lot of it is very much it's overspent, and then you get to a point where it's like, okay, we have to make the incredibly tough decision. You know, you gotta make a tough decision from here on out of how we're gonna go forward with this because the CEO is getting, barreled down on shareholders, whether you agree with it or not. That's just like the reality of it. And they go, well, either you do this or you lose your $20 million bonus that you shouldn't be having in the first place. But if you do that, you lose it, and then that's just kind of what ends up happening. So
For sure, yeah. No, I'm a World of Warcraft fanboy. I would
yeah,
love to work for them one day. Maybe whenever I say I want to work for Blizzard, I don't mean like that part. Like it's a really controversial thing to say, but I would like to work for that game specifically. That kind of stuff. I think it's really cool that a lot of the older games as well are kind of popping up a little more. Because a lot of them are unique in their own way, and yeah,
mm-hmm.
that's amazing. Okay, so I think that's everything I had for you today. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to ask. I'm sure Jordan would love to answer them either way. You can always DM me as well, or DM Jordan, for example, if that's okay with you. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, anything that you guys have, just feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm not hard to find. I answer pretty much anything. Like I said, I'm pretty open book. I like to help people out. So if you got anything, just feel free to hit me up on there and just kind of answer whatever that you got going. But I think overall, thank you so much for sharing the stage and just chatting all things video game development because it's a beautiful industry that I think is only getting bigger and bigger, becoming a bigger monster. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, yeah, it's amazing. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to do this with us. And
Absolutely.
just for everyone still here, anyone new that joined, we are recording this, so don't you worry. I will be posting a little later whenever YouTube decides to work with me, because I've had problems in the past where I'm trying to upload something and it goes halfway through and it's like, actually, we're not going to upload this, and I'm like, okay, well, So yeah, thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, like I said, my LinkedIn will probably be in the chat somewhere or any in like industry links or LinkedIn links or whatever. But feel free to reach out. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No worries, I do too. Have an amazing rest of your day and have fun at the GDC. I'm just gonna call it GDC.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, y'all. I'll see y'all later.
All right, goodbye.